I actually stumbled onto this while going through a box of fleet maintenance logs I'd picked up at an estate sale a few years back. The man who owned them had spent his career in commercial transport logistics across South America, primarily in the 1970s and 1980s, and the box was mostly just paperwork route sheets. Vehicle registration files, expense reports. But tucked in near the back were the fuel consumption records for a 60-vehicle taxi operation, broken down by month, by driver, and by vehicle. And one column of numbers didn't add up. Their fuel cost per mile was running about 25 to 30% below the regional average for comparable fleets in the same cities at the same time. Same roads, same vehicle make and model, same driving patterns. Different compound. Before I go any further, what I'm about to show you costs about $2. You can find it at any hardware store. I'll tell you exactly what to buy, where to get it, and how to use it. I called a friend of mine who had spent about 15 years as a mechanic specializing in commercial vehicles, mostly gasoline and diesel fleet work, delivery vans, utility trucks, that kind of thing. Read him the maintenance protocol straight from those old logs over the phone. There was a long pause on the other end. He said, "I know what that is. I haven't actually seen anyone use it in probably 15 or 20 years. And we were both genuinely excited in the specific way you get when something clicks into place and you can't quite believe you didn't already know it. The mechanism made complete sense once you understood the chemistry. The cost made it almost embarrassing how accessible it was." A few weeks later, he ran a controlled test on a delivery van he was servicing. Tracked fuel consumption over 4 weeks, before and after. The results were consistent with what those old South American taxi logs had shown. But I'll get to those numbers in a moment. First, let me tell you where this actually comes from. The compound is acetone. Pure acetone, not a branded fuel system cleaner, not a proprietary blend with a logo on the bottle. Acetone, a solvent that costs $2 to $4 for enough to treat your fuel for most of a year. And I'm not going to tell you this is a new discovery, it isn't. In the 1970s, commercial taxi operators in Japan and across parts of Southeast Asia were running acetone as a standard fuel additive at extremely low concentrations. Fractions of a percent by volume, not enough to change the smell or the appearance of the fuel, not enough to cause any issues with routine inspections or vehicle documentation. Just enough to change the fundamental chemistry of what happened inside the combustion chamber. The research behind it goes back considerably further than that. In the 1950s and early 1960s, industrial engineers operating large stationary gasoline and diesel engines, power generation facilities, marine propulsion systems, heavy manufacturing equipment across Europe and North America were losing a measurable fraction of their fuel to incomplete combustion. Fuel was entering the combustion chamber, failing to ignite fully, and exhausting as unburned hydrocarbons. They were paying for energy they weren't getting. The variable they kept returning to was surface tension. Fuel droplets entering the combustion chamber have surface tension. They want to stay compact, dense spheres. A large droplet presents less surface area to the ignition event. Less surface area means a less complete burn. The fuel that doesn't ignite fully doesn't disappear, it exits through the exhaust as pure waste. Those engineers began experimenting with low-concentration solvent additions that could reduce surface tension before the ignition cycle. Smaller droplets, more surface area, more complete combustion. More energy extracted from the same volume of fuel. West German automotive engineers were documenting the same principle independently in the early 1960s. Aviation fuel researchers in the United States were working the same variable during the same decade. Soviet industrial fleet operators were running similar protocols across their large machinery operations through the 1970s. Every engineering tradition that was serious about internal combustion efficiency arrived at the same finding, independently, across multiple continents and 3 separate decades. Surface tension reduction. And acetone is one of the most effective and accessible ways to achieve it at safe, minimal concentrations. That kind of convergence doesn't happen by accident. You already know this reaction, you've seen it your whole life and just never connected it to what's happening inside your fuel tank. Take a drop of cooking oil and place it on the surface of water in a bowl. It beads up, it sits in a tight sphere, it resists spreading because surface tension is holding it compact. Now add a single small drop of dish soap to the same water. The oil spreads flat almost immediately. The soap broke the surface tension that was holding the droplet together. That exact mechanism is what's happening to fuel droplets inside your injectors and combustion chamber. Gasoline entering the cylinder is under surface tension. The droplets want to stay large and round. Large droplets present less surface area to the ignition spark or the advancing flame front. Less surface area means a less complete burn. The fraction of fuel that doesn't ignite completely exits as unburned hydrocarbons in your exhaust. You paid for that fuel, your engine produced no work from it. Acetone at the right concentration does to fuel droplets what the dish soap did to that oil. It reduces surface tension. The droplets spread when they meet the intake charge. More surface area is available for ignition. More of the fuel burns completely. And you get more usable energy out of every tank. So, why have you never heard of it? The fuel additive industry generates over $40 billion globally per year. Branded products in colorful bottles with proprietary chemistry. $8 injector cleaners. $12 fuel stabilizers. $50 complete fuel system treatment kits, each one promising efficiency, cleanliness, performance. And here's what makes pure acetone commercially inconvenient for that entire industry. A pint of pure acetone costs $3 to $4 at any hardware store. At the correct treatment ratio, that pint handles roughly 40 to 50 full tanks of fuel. The cost per tank treatment is somewhere around 12 cents. There's no brand story that works at 12 cents per tank, no repeat purchase cycle, no marketing department, no shelf placement deal at the auto parts store. A $2 commodity sitting in the paint aisle next to the mineral spirits is not a business model. It's a business ending. Now, here's how to use it. Pure acetone is the only item on the parts list, and I want to be precise about what pure means here. Not nail polish remover. Nail polish remover is acetone diluted with water, conditioning agents, and fragrance compounds, not the same thing at the concentration you need. Not paint thinner. Paint thinner is a different solvent category entirely. Pure acetone, it's in the painting and finishing section of any hardware store, usually near the mineral spirits and lacquer thinner. It comes in a metal can. The label says acetone, or acetone solvent. A quart costs $3 to $4, a gallon runs $6 to $8. The quart will last most drivers the better part of a year at the treatment ratio I'm about to give you. The ratio is 1 ounce of acetone per 10 gallons of gasoline. 1 ounce. A standard shot glass. Add it directly to the fuel tank before you pump the fuel. The incoming fuel mixes it thoroughly as the tank fills. The smell at the pump nozzle is unchanged. The fuel looks identical. Your fuel system handles it without any noticeable difference except at the combustion chemistry level, which is exactly where you want the difference. Here's the one thing people get wrong when they first try this. They use too much. They reason that if 1 ounce helps, 4 ounces will help more. At significantly elevated concentrations, several ounces to a standard tank rather than 1 acetone can begin degrading certain rubber and polymer fuel system components over extended periods. Seals, hoses, gaskets. At 1 ounce per 10 gallons, the concentration is low enough that fuel system compatibility research has consistently found it within acceptable parameters for standard materials. The ratio is everything. Measure it with a dedicated small container. Don't estimate. How? Now, back to my mechanic friend in that delivery van. After 1 full month of treating the fuel at the correct ratio, he pulled the fuel injectors as part of a scheduled service interval. He wasn't expecting anything dramatic. What he found was that the injector tips were measurably cleaner than he would have predicted for the mileage on that vehicle. Not a transformation. A consistent, repeatable difference. Slightly more complete combustion means slightly less carbon residue depositing on injector faces and combustion chamber surfaces over time. The cleaner combustion leaves a cleaner engine. He started running it in his personal vehicle shortly after. A 2004 Ford F-150 with 185,000 miles. Over a 12-month measured period, his observed fuel economy improved by 9 to 13% against his prior 12-month baseline. Same commute routes, same fuel grade, same driving habits. Which sounds modest until you calculate it across 50 or 60 tank fills per year. That's a real number of gallons he didn't pay for. The energy potential was already there in the fuel. He just stopped throwing part of it out through the exhaust. The application extends considerably beyond your daily driver. Carbureted engines, anything built before fuel injection became standard in the early to mid-1980s, tend to show the strongest results. Carburation is less precisely controlled than modern injection systems, which means fuel droplet size going into the cylinder is less consistent, and the improvement from surface tension reduction is proportionally larger. If you're running small gasoline equipment, a portable generator, a riding lawnmower, an outboard boat motor, the same ratio applies, and the results track similarly. Small engines are typically tuned to run slightly rich by design, which means they're already burning with some built-in inefficiency. Improved atomization helps close that gap. Diesel is a different chemistry, and I want to be clear about that boundary. Diesel fuel self-ignites through compression rather than a spark, and the surface tension dynamics interact with added solvents differently than in gasoline. I wouldn't apply this to a diesel system without specific research for your particular engine configuration. For standard gasoline combustion, the mechanism is well documented. And then there's the use case that tends to surprise people most. Long storage vehicles. A car or truck that's been sitting in a garage for several months, slowly working through old fuel. Gasoline oxidizes in storage. Its combustion chemistry degrades. The surface tension characteristics of oxidized fuel are worse than fresh fuel. It already burns less efficiently. A small acetone treatment when you're burning through a stale tank before a fresh fill can assist combustion of fuel that's already chemically past its ideal window. It doesn't reverse oxidation, but it's a modest, cheap assist when you're working through a tank that time has already worked against. None of this replaces your mechanic, and it doesn't pretend to. Here's the honest limitation that belongs in this conversation. Results vary meaningfully based on engine condition and fuel quality. A modern direct injection engine running factory clean injectors on fresh, premium fuel is already operating close to its designed atomization efficiency. The room for improvement through surface tension modification is smaller. Where the gains are most consistent is in older engines, higher mileage engines, engines with some carbon accumulation on injector faces or combustion chamber walls, and engines that have been running on lower grade fuel over time. The cleaner and more modern your setup, the more modest the result. If you're driving a 2-year-old vehicle with under 30,000 miles, don't expect 30%. If you're driving a 15-year-old vehicle with 150,000 miles, you're in a different situation entirely. That's the honest version of what this does, and it belongs here before you go buy anything. Here's the part that keeps sitting with me. Every serious combustion researcher who worked this problem, from the industrial engineers in the 1950s to the fleet operators running taxis in the 1970s, came to the same conclusion. The fuel isn't the limiting variable. How it burns is the limiting variable. The gasoline you pump at any station wasn't engineered to combust perfectly in your specific engine under your specific driving conditions. It was engineered to be stable in transport, safe in storage, and broadly acceptable in performance across every piece of gasoline-powered machinery manufactured over the past half-century. That's not a failure of the fuel industry, that's just what a mass-market fuel has to be by definition. But the gap between broadly acceptable and genuinely optimal has always existed. And it sits in a metal can in the paint aisle of any hardware store. For about $3. The last video covered a cooling system corrosion inhibitor, a compound that's been protecting marine engines and heavy industrial equipment for over 50 years, costs about $2 to add to your coolant, and protects the internal passageways of your engine for the life of the vehicle. Next time, I'm going to show you a military-grade paint restoration compound that was never designed to reach the consumer market at all. Something developed for aircraft and naval vessel maintenance, available for about $3, that restores faded automotive paint to the kind of finish that professional correction shops charge $400 to deliver. I don't know what brought you here. Maybe your fuel costs have been climbing and you've been looking for something that actually holds up when you test it. Maybe you've got an older vehicle and you're trying to keep it running cleanly without spending money you don't need to. Maybe you just like understanding how things actually work underneath the surface. Doesn't matter, it works either way, now you know how. Knowledge like this doesn't disappear on its own, it gets buried. This channel digs it back up. Subscribe if that matters to you. Take care and I'll see you in